Hello everyone. Welcome to our lecture series on philosophy of mind. So we had been discussing the other day about the various criticisms that have been levied against the Cartesian dualism. We had picked up Gilbert Ryle. However, we had also visited Ryle vis-a-vis Drew Leder. So today in this session we will continue with Gilbert Ryle's critiques against Cartesian dualism, and before we start we would quickly like to revisit about the parallels between Drew Leder and Gilbert Ryle. So our question today is to ponder, was Drew Leder influenced by Gilbert Ryle, and what are the parallels between Drew Leder and Ryle? Drew Leder and Gilbert Ryle both contributed immensely to the critique of Cartesian dualism, although they approach the topics from different angles and with different philosophical focuses. While there isn't, and I would want to repeat this again, there isn't much of direct evidences that Leder was explicitly influenced by Gilbert Ryle, there are other clear parallels in their work, particularly in how they see the Cartesian notions of the mind-body relationship. Going ahead with our segment, which has been the criticism of Cartesian dualism, we again revisit Ryle's critique. Gilbert Ryle famously criticized Cartesian dualism in his work The Concept of the Mind, 1949, when he had published it, where he introduced the idea of the ghost in the machine to describe the mistaken dualist notion that the mind is something separate from the body. He argued that the mind is not a distinct substance, but rather a set of behaviors or dispositions, and that the mind-body distinction is a category mistake. This is a significant turn in the Rylean context, for he overthrows the entire gamut about the mind-body split by addressing it as a ghost in the machine. Ghost is a immaterial kind of a superficial entity that exists in the body, and how is this ghost responsible for the dwellings of the bodily functions? This derogatory remark made Gilbert Ryle come up with what he talks about the behavioral manifestation, which was explicitly missed out by René Descartes. Leder's critique, on the other hand, is interesting, for Leder focuses on the dichotomy between the Cartesian corpse and the lived body. Now, Cartesian corpse and the lived body, or Lebenswelt as we know, and Körper, have been quite in fashion since the time of German idealism, and we see the same being picked up here as well. By the definition of Cartesian corpse and lived body, Leder wanted to draw the focus between the distinction about how and where Cartesian dualism has gone immensely wrong. While Ryle deconstructed the philosophical underpinnings of dualism, Leder explored its phenomenological implications, emphasizing how the body is experienced from within, not just as an object, but as an integral part of our conscious experience. This is significant, for on the one hand we have the philosophical underpinnings of Gilbert Ryle, more so to do with the psychological behaviorism, and on the other hand we have the phenomenological implication of Leder. And when we are dealing with René Descartes vis-a-vis philosophy of mind, we will have to deal with analytical traditions and phenomenological tradition, and that is why Drew Leder's mention comes up here. Ryle's approach, Ryle rejected the idea that the mind and body are separate entities, proposing instead that mental states are better understood as states of behavioral dispositions. This non-dualistic view of the mind undermines the Cartesian split and suggests that what we call mental is just another way of describing complex patterns of behavior. This approach of Ryle is again significant, for it suggests or mentions or talks for the first time something what he calls as behavioral dispositions. What are behavioral dispositions? Behavioral dispositions are nothing but the way that one manifests. For example, if I'm angry, it will show on my face. Similarly, if I'm happy, smile will be reflected on my face. So the manifestations that are reflected outside vis-a-vis my bodily actions is a clear implication about the events going on inside the mind. So how can it be a ghost in the machine? Leather's approach, on the other hand, he also in a similar way rejects the mind-body split, though he does so by emphasizing the lived experience of the body. He argues that Cartesian dualism fails to account for the way we actually experience our bodies, not as machines, but as central to our being and consciousness. And this is where the phenomenological approach by Drew Lehder is interesting, for he shows that the entire foundation on which Cartesian dualism was built up, mind and body as two separate substance dualism, is erroneous, for they do not exist as separate entities or as machines, but they are central. They are the very essence of our very existence, of our very being and consciousness. Ryle's implicit focus, which is basically on embodiment. Although Ryle's work is primarily focused on linguistic analysis and the logic of mental concepts, his rejection of Cartesian dualism indirectly supports an embodied view of the mind. By arguing that the mind is not a separate entity but is expressed through behavior, Ryle laid some groundwork for later embodied theories of mind. And this is where I think is the defining moment that we can segregate between Gilbert Ryle and René Descartes. If we can call René Descartes as the founding father of disembodied thesis, Gilbert Ryle clearly, easily comes up as the founder or one of the most significant figures in our embodied theories of mind. Lehder's explicit focus. So on the one hand, if we have Gilbert Ryle focusing implicitly, we have Drew Lehder focusing explicitly. Lehder explicitly addresses embodiment by contrasting the Cartesian corpse with the lived body. His work is deeply rooted in phenomenology, which directly explores how consciousness is embodied and how the body is central to human experience. Talking about phenomenology, we must also understand that it was started by Husserl, and of course before him the scholastic philosophers had already spoken about it, but it is primarily Husserl who had started this ism of phenomenology. Ryle's critique. Ryle's critiqued the reductionist tendencies in philosophy that sought to explain mental phenomena in purely mechanical or physical terms, arguing that such explanations miss the complexity and richness of human experience. So Gilbert Ryle has been a strong critic of reductionist. Similarly, Lehder's critique on reductionism has been that he criticizes the reductionist view of the body as a mere machine, as found in Cartesian dualism. He argues that this view reduces the richness of human experience to mere physical processes, ignoring the subjective lived experience of the body. And as much as the richness of human experience, if it is bracketed or if it is not taken into account, we will not have a holistic understanding of the experiential subjective feel of the body, and that was majorly lacking in our Cartesian dualism. While latter may not have been directly influenced by Ryle, their critiques of Cartesian dualism are parallel in significant ways. Both philosophers challenge the idea of a strict separation between mind and body, emphasizing instead the integrated, embodied nature of human experience. Ryle's work provides a linguistic and logical critique of dualism, while as for Leder offers a phenomenological exploration of the same issues, focusing on how we experience our bodies in everyday life. Together, their works contribute to a broader movement in philosophy that seeks to overcome the limitations of Cartesian dualism and develop a more holistic understanding of the mind-body relationship. Now, understanding that Gilbert Ryle's critique of Cartesian dualism, particularly his concept of category mistake and his view of mental states as dispositions, raised important philosophical questions about the nature of mind and body. While his arguments were influential, they also faced criticism, highlighting the complexities and potential problems within his framework. Now, we will try to see where the lacuna or the gaps have had been in Rylean philosophy. Let's delve into both concepts in detail, discussing the problematic aspects that emerged. First, about category mistake. Definition. Now, category mistake is one such key concept that keeps on coming or keeps recurring in Concept of the Mind that was written by Gilbert Ryle. So one of the key concepts easily in Rylean philosophy is all about the category mistake. If we are to define category mistake, we will like to define it in this way. A category mistake occurs when things of one kind are mistakenly treated as if they belong to another category. Ryle used this concept to critique Descartes' notion of the mind as a separate, non-physical entity. Ryle argued that this understanding leads to confusion because it misplaces the mind with a category where it does not fit. The problematic areas. First, oversimplification. Critics argue that Ryle's category mistake oversimplifies the complexity of mental phenomena. By claiming that Cartesian dualism results in a simple logical error, Ryle may have overlooked the rich, nuanced discussions around the nature of consciousness, subjective experience, and the many philosophical positions that vary from dualism to physicalism. 2. Failure to address qualia. Critics contend that Gilbert Ryle doesn't adequately address the subjective qualities of experience known as qualia. The feeling of pain or the taste of sugar cannot simply be expressed in terms of behaviors or dispositions without losing important aspects of what those experiences entail. The subjective nature of mental states may resist reduction to behavioral terms, thereby challenging Ryle's dismissal of dualistic interpretations. Number 3. Behavior's limitations or behaviorism's limitations. Gilbert Ryle's idea that mental states can be reduced to dispositions to behave has been criticized for being oversimplified and neglecting the inner aspects of psychological processes. Critics of behaviorism suggest that it does not capture the full essence of what mental states are, including elements of consciousness that are not directly observable. And this is significant, for let's understand that Gilbert Ryle's category mistake that he had termed the Cartesian dualism as, though it tries to come up with behaviorism in the form of disposition, it doesn't really address the problem of qualia. And without qualia, the richness of mind or mental consciousness cannot ever be taken into consideration. Further, the mental states as dispositions. Now, this is yet another key feature of Gilbert Ryle. Just like category mistake, so is mental states as dispositions. Ryle argued that mental states should be understood as dispositions, mentioning that they are tendencies or inclinations to behave in certain ways in particular situations. For example, saying someone is angry means they are likely to behave in certain ways rather than asserting that they possess an inner state called anger. The problematic aspects: dispositional language and incompleteness. While Ryle sought to reframe mental states as dispositions, this approach can lead to an incomplete understanding of consciousness. Critics argue that dispositional language does not capture all aspects of mental life, particularly those that involve inner experiences that do not necessarily lead to observable behaviors. A person might experience thoughts or feelings that do not manifest in behavior, raising questions about the adequacy of Ryle's framework. For instance, it is but seen that many a times, say for example, if we are to conduct ourselves in a public domain, we will be conducting as per the settings of the environment. That is to say, if I am going to appear for an interview, doesn't matter how much of anxiety or how much of anxiousness I might be having from inside, I will definitely try to conceal or try to hide it from my behavioral dispositions. So, the critics argue that it isn't the case that all our mental states are manifested through our behavioral dispositions, for human beings are intelligent species and they do have the art of concealing, they do have the art of hiding many states, many mental states, even if they are not about it. So, this in a way questions Gilbert Ryle's behavioral disposition. Mental states as disposition, the problematic aspect is yet the circularity, or this is something which has been repeatedly seen in Gilbert Ryle's philosophy. There is an issue of circularity in Ryle's argument. If mental states are defined solely as dispositions to behave, one might still ask why these dispositions exist or how they arise. If we are not allowed to use mental states in our explanation, it becomes difficult to articulate a comprehensive account of human psychology without falling back into undesirable theoretical commitments. Exclusion of intentionality is yet another problematic aspect. Ryle's reduction of mental states to behavioral dispositions raises concerns regarding intentionality, the capacity of thoughts to be about or directed towards something. Critics argue that by framing minds solely in terms of dispositional behavior, important features of mental phenomena like beliefs and desires that are about specific objects or states of affairs may be overlooked or inadequately explained. Gilbert Ryle's contribution to the philosophy of mind, particularly his critiques of Cartesian dualism through the notions of category mistake and viewing mental states as dispositions, have sparked significant debate and further inquiry. Although his arguments have encouraged a broader consideration of behavior and a rejection of strict dualism, they also raise challenging philosophical problems. Critics further highlight the complexity of mental experiences, the limitations of dispositional accounts, and the richness of intentionality that cannot be fully captured by a purely behaviorist framework. As a result, Ryle's ideas continue to be a point of reference in discussion about the mind and its relation to the body, generating ongoing conversation about the nature of consciousness and mental phenomena. So, Gilbert Ryle, as we have been seeing, has done his bit in arguing or critiquing against the Rylean philosophy. However, we would also address some of the lesser known parts of Gilbert Ryle in our next section. Thank you so much.